Hey, welcome to Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast. In this two-part series, Jack Schonely and I sit down with Dr. Tania Glenn to discuss the importance of mental health for first responders. Dr. Tania Glenn is the president of Tania Glenn and Associates, a clinical practice in Central Texas that's focused on promoting resilience and providing critical care to first responders and veterans. As a leading national clinician in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, Dr. Glenn specializes in creating effective programs designed to mitigate traumatic stress and to assist patients with their return to normalcy as quickly as possible. As a licensed clinician with 30 years of experience, Dr. Glenn deployed to the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, New York City in 2001, New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Dallas in 2016 for the aftermath of the attack on the Dallas Police Department, and to Uvalde for the school shooter in 2022. Recognized nationally, Dr. Glenn's clients include a host of Texas and Arizona police, fire, and EMS departments, federal law enforcement agencies, commercial aviation, and air medical programs. She's the clinical director for several peer support teams with her unique perspective on special operations competencies. Dr. Glenn is a noted author with numerous books dealing with mental health, PTSD, first responders, military, and family. Additionally, she's been involved in several documentaries dealing directly with mental health trauma. Thank you to our sponsors, Shotover, Dallas Avionics, and Robinson Helicopters.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, Jon Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Schonely.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast. I'm your host, Jack Schonely. With me today is the creator of the Hangar Z podcast, Jon Gray. Jon, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Jack. I'm excellent. Really honored to be here and a part of this really, really important conversation.
I agree. This is an important conversation. We say that a lot in different ways, that we have important guests. So we truly believe it when we say it. But this is a little bit different, and it's unique. And we're really lucky and honored to have our guest today. And our guest is Dr. Tania Glenn. Tania, welcome to the Hangar Z podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we really feel lucky to have you. And for those of you that don't know about Tania, you're about to find out about what Tania does and what she's done in her career and all the good she's doing. It's an important topic of mental health and dealing with it. And we're going to talk about some powerful issues today. Some of it's going to be serious. We'll still have some fun and talk about other things, but we're gonna cover some important issues today that are very serious, and they mean a lot to us in law enforcement and first responders, military, and certainly to people like Tania who are out there dedicating their life and their career to helping people. That's what we're going to get to in a few minutes, but we like to always start on the podcast to just kind of get to know our guests and find out a little bit about them and where they grew up, and when their career choices were forming and all of that. So we're going to definitely do that with Tania this morning. So Tania, where did you grow up?
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I lived there until halfway through first grade. My dad was a civil engineer, and he took a job with Aramco. And so he shipped us all out to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia for 5.5 years. It was supposed to be 1 year. It turned into 5.5. And I'll tell you, that experience was absolutely just life-changing. And every summer when we came home, we traveled the world and saw everything. And it was interesting. When it was time to leave Dhahran, my mom was done living in Saudi Arabia. So there was like, hey, we either go home or get divorced. So so we came home and ended up in Austin. So that was in 7th grade for me. So I have continued to grow up in Austin, Texas, and I now live on the outskirts of Austin, like most of us in the area. So I live north of Boston in a town called Leander, Texas, and my office is in Cedar Park, Texas.
So most of your time in school was in Texas.
Absolutely.
Austin, Texas.
Yep.
Did you have any big interests inside or outside of school that that you want to talk about?
My biggest thing growing up, I was an equestrian, so I rode hunters and jumpers. And I think I have a lot of life analogies to riding horses and, getting thrown off when you're too cocky and those kinds of things. I share those a lot. But yeah, I started when I think I was 9. I started riding and I rode all the way up until my freshman year at the University of Texas, and brought home some grades that first semester that weren't exactly where my parents thought it should be. So I was like, hey, my dad was like, hey, you can either ride professionally or you can go to college, but not both. And so that's when I stopped riding and I started running. That's when I started really getting into running, and that turned into running a lot of marathons in my 30s. But I've always loved exercise, physical activity. I still miss riding. I still occasionally have a dream where I have my horse back. And so, which is, kind of, you wake up all happy and disappointed at the same time. But yeah, it's always been just sports and athletics. That's been my thing.
Are you still a runner?
Yes, a little bit. So, I ran 10 marathons in 4 years and my knees paid the price. I've had some, some good surgeries and some, help along the way. I run now just kind of for maintenance, mostly with the dog when she wants to run. And then I do a lot less a lot less high impact stuff like the elliptical and stuff like that. I like to think I could still run a marathon, but probably not. So yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot of marathons in a short period of time, Tania. No wonder your knees are hurting.
I had the opportunity to run the San Diego Marathon. So I've been, I enjoy running, which I think most people find odd. And Tanya, it sounds like you enjoy it too. So you probably get the same comments. I think most people spend their life avoiding having to go for a run.
Yeah.
But I've always found it therapeutic. And, my 20s and into my 30s, my goal was to run a marathon. So I started the training program twice, signed up for the San Diego Marathon. I think I was in my mid-20s and got towards the end of the training program and I couldn't get the time off for the day the event was in San Diego. I worked for San Diego PD at the time. Fast forward for, I think it was my 40th birthday. No, it was earlier than that, but I actually trained for and ran the San Diego Marathon. And I remember finishing it. I felt like, holy cow, this is an amazing accomplishment for me. But I remember also saying, I will never, ever do this again. So the fact you did 10 of those in 4 years is absolutely amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. My first one was Houston, and I crossed the finish line and said, I'll never do this again. And then I turned around and looked at this timer. And when I looked at the timer, I was like, well, if I knock 20 minutes off my time, I can go run Boston. So then it turned into, So I did run San Diego 1 year. I ran the San Diego Marathon the year that the headline the next day in the newspaper was, "Where's June Glenn when you need it?" Because it was sunny and hot and windy the whole time. I ran that year. And and then 1 year later, it was my 4th marathon. It was Houston again, and that was my Boston qualifier. And so I ran Boston, and I'll tell you, it spoils you. Boston is amazing, and running that marathon, everything else kind of pales in comparison. But that was the thing. It's like, well, if I knock off 20 minutes, like I could do this. So that's why I did it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment getting to run Boston. For those that don't know, you have to actually qualify for their marathon in time to be invited to run. So you don't just sign up for it. You've got to be invited in based on your time trials. That's really cool.
Oh, I watched a marathon one time.
Now that's boring.
that has never been on my list. I've always admired people that do it, and certainly that do it multiple times. Oh my gosh. But boy, it was not on my radar.
Well, the LA City Marathon is a big one. Did you have any involvement in not in the organization, but monitoring that racetrack during your time?
Sure. I mean, from air support, we were involved in that from a downlink video perspective, and so I think I've flew over that a couple times. The numbers, it's just always cool to see the number of people, the volume of people filling the street. It goes from an empty street into this packed street for as far as you can see. It really is cool to look at and watch. I admire you both for having done it.
I always felt like running for me was a way to kind of defragment my brain. If you think of it like a computer, it always reprocess kind of my thoughts, and it gave me time to really kind of reflect on a lot of the decisions that I was about to make. And it's always been therapeutic for me. And I don't know if you felt the same way, Tania, with your experience running.
Yeah. Oh, big time. That's when I've made all my big decisions, is during long runs. That's when I have like figured out things about my patients, like, especially when I was a brand new therapist. During my runs, it's like it would just hit me. It's like, oh, that's where I need to go next, or oh, that's what he's trying to tell me, right? And so, especially when I was a young therapist and just still getting my skills down, it's all the answers just come to you when you run, and it is like a disc defrag. It's just everything. It's organized, and that's I start every morning with a workout. I've always done that. It's my whole adult life. And my typical get up time is 3:30 in the morning, because then the dog gets walked at 4 and I work out. It's the only time of my day I have time to do it. By the evening, my phone's blowing up and I'm tired. And so every morning, it's like, I'm just religious about it, because it is just the time to really get focused and centered and balanced and make big decisions that are still pending from the day before. It's, to me, it's like salvation.
Absolutely.
We're jumping ahead a bit, but I got to ask you, is this something that, based on what you just said, is this something that you have used to recommend to your patients and to the people that you're treating? Have you involved running particularly into that treatment?
Each person's different. When we talk about exercise, and when I see a first responder or a veteran and they've quit working out, I always ask them, the key is to do what you love that involves movement, just to move more. And I do say to them, if running hurts your knees, I don't want you to run. I just want you to identify what you like to do that involves movement and move more. And for example, I have a former patient, he's a sheriff's deputy, and he had a bunch of bad pediatric traumas back to back. And we treated the trauma, and, I did what I do. And he came in the following week and he's like, well, I really need to get back to working out. And he goes, do you want me to join a gym? And I said, not yet, because you haven't been working out at all. I said, I want you to do what you love. And he said, well, I like to walk my dog. And I said, so his assignment that first week was walk your dog twice, 15 minutes each time. And he goes, that's totally doable. And I said, that's the point. He started to walk his dog and increase the numbers of times, right? And then fast forward, now he's back in the gym. He's complete beast mode. But it didn't start that way. And so I always encourage people, whatever it is you love to do it. But don't do what's going to hurt you or set you back, right? So that's the key to it.
At what point in life did you kind of make the career choice where you're at now? Or did you? I mean, is this something that you had in mind early on, or is it something that hit you during college? At what point in life did your career choice that you're in now come into play?
I was supposed to be a lawyer. My brother is a surgeon, so a doctor and a lawyer, according to my parents. And so I was halfway through college. I had already taken the LSAT. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to law school, I guess. And I needed a summer job because I was poor. And I applied for a summer job at it's called the Austin Sunshine Camp. And it's sponsored by the Young Men's Business League of Austin. And it was the first year that they had the camp for the teenagers. It's a wilderness survival camp out at Lake Travis. And they have a ropes course out there. It was amazing, amazing to see these kids come off that bus, and they're all defensive and angry. And they're like, oh my God, it's hot. And I hate you. And I hate you. And I hate everybody. And to watch this transformation in the week that we had them. And so one day I'm sitting there, and it's at the close of one of the camps. And I was like, Holly, I wish you could do this for a living. And the camp nurse is like, you need to sit down. And she starts talking about change your major, do what you love, right? So I went home and I informed my parents that I, in fact, was going to change my major and go psychology, sociology, double major. And my dad took 3 Tylenol, left the kitchen, didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. And he came back and, a couple of weeks later, and he's like, how are you going to survive? You're never going to make any money. And I was like, well, I'll figure it out. Right. I'll figure it out. But this is it for me. And so, they supported me, and it was good. I went on to grad school, and And in grad school, I was kind of like feeling my way through grad school in terms of what kind of work I wanted to do. And it was February of 1993. And that's when the ATF raided the Branch Davidian compound in Waco. And that day I was like, that's it. I want to go to places like Waco. I want to help people like the ATF. I want to go there right now. Of course, I wasn't qualified yet because I hadn't even graduated. But I went to school the next day and I told my professors that I was going to do that. And they told me I was crazy. So here I am 31 years later. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's perfect. It is
that is a great story. It's really good. I mean, isn't it fun? It's just amazing. And we find it on the podcast, but we've all heard this in life. When you hear people's stories and it's just funny how something or someone affects you and you make choices based on that contact, based on that experience, based on that camp, and it changes you. And then you look back on it 30 years later and go, wow, what if I hadn't done that camp? You might be in a courtroom, as an attorney, and you might be miserable. Or who knows, you might have loved it too. But the point is that somebody and something changed you and it brought you to where you're at. And it's just so cool. That's a great story.
And, several of my patients have told me, you were put on this earth to do this job. Like, you are here for this. Like, this is so you. And a couple people said it's kind of eerie how you found it. But yeah, I love every day that I go to work. I love what I do. I have the best patients in the world and just love every day I go to work.
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, our contact where we first met was many, many years ago through ALEA, now ABSA, where you would be at the national convention or safety seminars and give a class. And I remember the first time. I can't remember which class or where it was, but because you were there all the time. But I remember the first time I sat in on a class with you, and I remember thinking the same thing. Oh my gosh, this person was brought on this earth to do this. And your passion, your devotion, your knowledge, experience, it really shined. And it was like, wow, this profession that Dr. Tania Glenn has chosen is not for everyone. It is very difficult in many ways, but thank goodness there's people like you that do it. And I remember thinking that, and every time that I'd be around and hear others talk about you and after your class and go, they all said the same thing. Wow. That was impactful. That's really making me think. I mean, I heard that so many times. And so I'm so glad you went to that camp, Tania. Personally, I'm really thankful that you went to that camp and you made that choice.
Yeah. Got my ass kicked by a few of those kids. It was amazing. Loved every second of it.
Yeah. I give you a lot of credit for voluntarily working with our community. Being a part of the community, I know how tough it can be to talk to some of the folks that we're peers with. Being in this industry hardens a lot of people, and so you've got a tall task a lot of times, I feel like, to get through to folks that need the help because they've spent a career essentially, putting up these defenses to protect themselves and their, seemingly emotions to, not have to talk about it. And your job is to tear that down and to help these people. So I commend you for that. And thank you. As there's a lot of people that need the help in a really bad way. And then when it comes to airborne law enforcement, it's interesting because I feel like for the folks that make it to airborne law enforcement, most of us have spent a career in the field and have done a lot of pretty dynamic things in their career and have seen quite a bit. And then you get to air support, and then you're over the most critical incidents on a daily basis that the city has to offer. So while we're not on the ground directly, confronting the suspects, we're still, actively engaged in these things. So I think because of that, a lot of times, at least in my experience in airborne law enforcement, from a mental health standpoint, it seems like airborne law enforcement is kind of a second thought when it comes to mental health. So I think it's really important, and you've already been doing this for quite a long time, for folks to consider the mental health ramifications that come as a result of being over all these critical incidents and, all the things that we do. So again, thank you for your involvement on both of those fronts. That's very commendable.
Thank you. Thank you. I wrote about one of my books about like special operations groups, and I tie air medical and airborne law enforcement into that. It's a unique niche. You don't make those units because you're a slacker. You make those units because you've been a hard worker and a hard charger. And it's the same with the air medical side of the community. I mean, those nurses and medics aren't slackers. And that means that they've already seen a lot. And then they go into this program that just deals with things going bad, things going wrong, critical patients and critical incidents. You're not, dealing with the quick call that's just like, code 4 and good to go and, whatever. You're dealing with all the themes, all of them. To me, and what I wrote about in this book is like the air programs need to have their own mental health system in place. And that's to have a specialist, to have people on board and ready to go and ready to help. And also ready to help them clean up the mess from all the many years of trauma that they've already sustained just to get to this, the aviation side of the house. So yeah, and then you have things like near misses or God forbid a crash and or even a crash in a neighboring county or city. It rocks your world because everybody knows everybody. There is such a need, and of course in aviation there's the extra guardedness because no one wants to be deemed unfit to fly. It's the kiss of death, and so really just focusing on the resilience and on proactive mental health programs to do a lot of preventative care and just cleaning up old mess has been the way to go for a lot of programs.
Yeah, we're going to definitely talk about that here in a few minutes with the front loading and training and resilience, the word resilience. We'll talk about that here in a minute. What was your first job as Dr. Tania Glenn? When you got out, what was the first job that you took where you were working?
I had my master's degree for 10 years before I went back and got my doctorate. So my first job, I worked while I was still doing my second year internship. I worked weekend nights at an ER here in Austin. And during the day, Monday through Friday, I was the child adolescent therapist at the Austin Rape Crisis Center. So that was a period of 7 months where I worked 76-hour weeks. I'll never do that again. And so my first job was the Austin Rape Crisis Center, being the kids counselor and working my internship in the emergency room weekend nights. And then when I rolled out of my internship and graduated, I went back to Breckenridge Hospital and worked weekend nights in the ER for 10 years. That was my first sort of job out of grad school. And then weekdays, I was building my practice on the side, just sort of like starting to get the train moving, the slow moving train to get it going. It was a lot of heavy duty trauma work, obviously initially, and then getting my practice going on the side.
Can you remember your first impactful incident or patient or person that you dealt with that really, maybe it made you even question what you had gotten yourself into, or maybe it was an impactful where you saw your success or something. Do you remember the first one?
From my time, there's been a few, and I'll just kind of highlight the most impactful ones. When I was at the Austin Rape Crisis Center, I was on call one night, and that's where you go to the ER. And if there's a rape survivor, you just sit with them and make sure that they get connected to resources. And there's one who, the perpetrator came through a broken window. She's on the bottom story of the apartment she lived in, the complex, first floor. And she turned in 3 notices to get her window fixed. And that's how he came in. And I ended up working with her, even though I was the kids therapist, I ended up working with her a lot because she connected to me that night that I met her in the ER. She had real bad trauma, real bad. She ended up suing that apartment complex and won millions. And I ran into her years later. And you know how you always see a lot of people get really changed by money. I ran into her years later. She won the lawsuit and she bought a little used Honda and she put herself through nursing school and she put the rest of the money away. And I was like, wow, like
That's cool.
amazing, right? Amazing. In the ER, my first day there, this is when I learned really like to compartmentalize emotions as all public safety people do. It was my first shift in that ER, and there was a 15-year-old girl who overdosed, and they were about to lavage her, and she was crying and screaming and begging them to stop. And I was like, oh, and I felt it like, oh, like, what is that what is that knot in my throat? And then I learned how to like shove it down and like just go straight objective to not feel anything. That was very impactful because that's where I developed that skill on her. And then the third one, and this is a big one. So I went to Oklahoma City after the bombing. So this is 1995. At this point, I'd been in the ER for 3 years. So, you know, it's all dated, little, you know how it hardens you. So I've been in the ER for 3 years. I got back from the Oklahoma City bombing, and I'd been back for a week. And here comes the trauma stat. The end code is, you know, and it's a police officer, and it was a friend of mine. And he died. And I just remember, number one, calling his fiance because I knew her until she was in Waco. And I said, you need to get down here now. And I remember her telling me, I don't have the right shoes. And I was like, you need to get in your car and come down here. It was one of those nights where I remember I was just kind of pacing back and forth. And I just kept saying, this isn't supposed to happen to us. Like, this isn't supposed to happen to us. And I think that was like my first true like traumatic death as a human being. I'd had, you know, grandparents who got old and died. Okay. But it was my first like line of duty death, my first traumatic loss of a friend, and being on duty in the ER and being fresh out of Oklahoma City. Like, it rocked my world. And I did what I do. Like I tried to do all the right things. In the next 6.5 months, I'm burned out from the ER. I'm traumatized by the loss of him. And I was running and I was lifting and I was avoiding alcohol and I was a complete asshole. Like I had nothing to offer anybody. Like it was nothing was going well. I didn't know what to do. And actually I was like this close to going back to grad school. One night I'm on duty in the ER in the crash unit talking to my friend on evenings. Her name's Tish. And I was like, you know what, Tish, they just built SeaWorld down in San Antonio. So maybe I'll just go work there because I would rather scoop seal poop than deal with people. And she's like, do you hear yourself? And I was like, I do. And this night, just right after I said that to Tish, this one nurse walked by. Her name's Elizabeth. Elizabeth was kind of like the type B in the sea of type A's. And Elizabeth walked past me just out of arm's length. And she never stopped. She never missed a beat. She's just out of arm's length. And she said as she passed, she goes, you know what, Tania, ever since you got back from Oklahoma City, you've been a complete asshole. You need help. And she kept going. And I was like, wow. And you could have heard a pin drop. And Tish is like, and she's like, I'm really sorry she said that to you. And I was like, no, she's right. Like, she's right. So I jumped on the couch. I had a great therapist. And she like, duh, like I'm a therapist. Like I should know this. But it's so hard to see it in yourself, right? Till somebody from the outside points out, hey. And we were able to work through like all the trauma of Oklahoma City, the moral injury of not being able to do more, the very, very, very difficult task of having to basically come home after your deployment, and the guilt you feel for leaving other people there, you know, all that stuff. We worked through all of that. And then I was back. So that was such a pivotal point in my career. Because I was dealing with burnout already. I was dealing with these two massive traumas. I was dealing with the complexities of deploying to a disaster that wasn't very well run. Oklahoma City was a bit of a mess. And just picking up the pieces afterwards. And finally, I jumped on the couch and somebody else helped me pick those pieces up. And it was a game changer.
There's a really valuable lesson for all of us in what you just told us. And that is, here's somebody that is trained to recognize all things mental health related and trained to treat them, in this case, you, and you weren't recognizing it. And I think the point that we need to do is that we as street cops or firefighters or paramedics or or soldiers, we're not trained in any of that. We don't have all these, all the background training experience in that. So it's easy to miss it in each other and easy to miss it evaluating ourselves. You're trained to do it and you were missing it. And somebody else had to recognize it and step in and kind of grab you and say, hey, Tania, you know, something's wrong. And you then step forward and fixed it. I think that's a great story in that, you know, you have a different background than we have, completely different. And yet the same things were happening with you that happen to patients that you deal with all the time.
100%. 100%. And, you know, honestly, there was my first shift back was, and this is right before the officer was killed. My first shift back, my first patient back after being in Oklahoma City at the bombing for a week was a 19-year-old girl who took 10 amoxicillin as an overdose because her boyfriend was giving another girl attention. So she did the whole like, oh, watch me take some pills. And, you know, amoxicillin's not going to kill you. And so I came back and that was my first patient back. And suddenly like everything was bullshit. And everything in the ER, the patients, this is not a real crisis. This is a bunch of crap. Right. And so it's really easy to put all the focus, the attention, the blame on that. And I think for public safety, it's easy to blame the patients. It's easy to blame the public. It's easy to blame your department or your sergeant or whatever chain of command. Like it's easy to put it on and find all the reasons besides you, right? And then when you sit down on the couch with someone who can help you unpack it and sort it out in a totally like a non-judgmental, loving way, it's like, okay, yeah, I can own that. That's mine. That was mine to own, right? Absolutely. Absolutely.
What that behavior describing, I think describes just about 90% of police officers, you know, as much as we hate to admit it, you know, every police officer in their vocabulary is this is bullshit. Yeah. And, you know, you try and fight against that and protect yourself from making that happen, but it's kind of an inevitability of the job. So, you know, I love that you bring that up with someone as highly trained and educated as you are. You couldn't see it in yourself. One of our good friends, RJ Garwood, he was involved in a crash off of Huntington Beach, actually Newport Beach, a few years back. And one of the things he talked about was having 5 friends a part of your life. He called them the 5 mother effers. He says, these 5 people have to be the ones that will call you out if they see that behavior and say, hey, look, you've changed. Something's going on. What's up? You know, and not only do you have to have one of those 5, you have to be one of those 5 because you don't recognize that in yourself. Someone else does. So I love that someone is able to speak into you and you recognized it and you adjusted accordingly. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Prior to that, my supervisor who, you know, she was okay. She wasn't a great supervisor, but she said to me, she goes, you know what, you've changed and it's not for the better. And that just like built more resentment. Like, you know, you've changed and it's not for the better. What am I supposed to do with that? But Elizabeth's like, you've changed and you need help. Like, and you know, later on that evening, she's like, I don't know what it is going on with you, but I've seen you, and I can't stand watching this. And I was like, well, that's the loving way to do that, right? Like, I can't stand to see you struggle. And so, you know, yeah, absolutely. You know, those 5 friends, like one of them to call you out or all 5 of them to call you out. True. Right. But they do it because they care about you in a loving way. Right. And they offer like, hey, what do we need to help you? Like, how can we help you with this? Absolutely.
That is powerful. We're going to start before we get into what you do and how you do it and why you do it and all those great things. We got to talk about the problem. So let's talk about the bad stuff. We'll get it out of the way. Where are we at in the world of first responders and mental health? Give us the bad news, and then we'll talk about some of the good news and the progress and what you do.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Well, I think The bad news is obviously there's still a lot of problems. There's a lot of trauma undealt with. There's still a lot of suicide. There's still a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. The year 2020 didn't help at all between the pandemic and the riots. And so I feel like that to me, I feel like things are improving slowly. That was a huge setback. And that setback, we're still coming out of that. So the bad news is that we had a big setback across the board, and we're struggling to come out of that still. But then there's the good news is that, things are really changing.
You've been doing this a long time. Jon and I have been in this business a while. Mental health has come a long way. There's no doubt. I mean, the way it's talked about, the way it's dealt with, it's become more of a priority, probably not as big a priority as you would like and as we would like, but it has changed for the better, no doubt. But if you had to give a grade to law enforcement in particular, where are we at? Could you give it a grade of where law enforcement in general is when it comes to the mental health side of our work?
I give it a C+. I think we're there. And some departments I'd give, or some counties or some cities, I'd give them an A+, whereas others are going to get an F. So we're kind of average.
Yeah.
Across the board, I say we're average. We're doing okay overall.
That's fair. And we've all seen departments that do get A+, and we've also seen departments that say they're doing things. I'm sure you can relate to this, Tania, that they say they're doing things. We have a program, and we have we have a wellness program, but then when it comes to doing stuff, they don't do anything. But they have it in writing. They have a program. They think they're doing great things, but they're not doing anything. So I think that C+ is very fair. But there's A's and F's out there as well, and we've all seen them.
Right.
You see them a lot more than we do, but that's very interesting of where we're at.
What trends are you seeing currently as it relates to mental health in law enforcement? Are you seeing a lot of agencies start to adopt the peer support programs or improve their peer support programs? Or are you still seeing the kind of the same trajectory as it's kind of been?
I am excited about what a lot of agencies are doing in terms of peer support. The country's really moved away from the CISD, CISM sort of mentality and is doing much more comprehensive peer support, which I think is wonderful. I have found the best team in the country, hands down, is the United States Border Patrol. Shout out to Border Patrol. I was in Tucson in the aftermath of Agent Brian Terry's death, dealing with Border Patrol. And I was riding out with a Borstar agent, and we stopped to get gas, and I met my first Border Patrol peer support agent, and he invited me to training. So I went to Yuma in August. It was delightful, 125 degrees every day. And I loved learning from them. And I kind of adopted their style of doing things. They're very, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, clothing, shelter, safety in the crisis, and, and taking care of their folks. They're just very strong at what they do. So I've seen a lot of police departments starting to adopt peer support and to do better by them, to train them better and to trust them and allow them to do what they're meant to do. And then I've seen a lot of departments trying to get more serious about implementing programs. Like just today, I had a conversation with a city in Texas that they only have their EAP. And they're like, we need services specific to police, fire, EMS. And so I see a lot more of that request, right? The flip side of that, though, is that at some point, I think first responders kind of became the thing in the mental health world. And there's a lot of therapists who say that they work with first responders, and they're not qualified. Like I'm happy that you like them, but it doesn't mean you can treat them. And, we have a lot of patients who come in with those very negative experiences. One of my current patients was involved in a shooting a few years ago, and he went to see a clinician, and she's like, well, how do you feel about the shooting? He's like, I feel really good. Like it was a good shoot. And she was horrified. And she told him that he should be ashamed of himself. And I'm like,
yeah,
wow,
that's the website. Really? So, be careful what you think you're getting into, right? I've heard of therapists who, officers who are working like on human trafficking and talking about HT, and therapists crying because they have no idea that these bad things happen in the world. And it's like, you better know what you're getting into. So that the good news is that there's more and more interest and more programs being created, but it has to be the level of quality control that needs to happen for this population. Because, you know, you go once and you have a bad experience, a lot of people will never go again.
Oh, I know people in that category that went and said, oh, you know, I'm going to go. And they went once and said, that was a waste of my time. Yeah. And it's so important of what you just said, where the person that's providing this service to try and help you needs to know the business. And that's something I know that you have taken very seriously from day one. When you went all in and you decided you're going to help first responders, you went all in. And the word ride along comes up a lot in things that you talk about and write about. The documentary that we're going to talk about here in a little bit has a lot of that in it, talking about how it's important for the person that's treating you to know what, you know, the terminology, to know that a good shoot is not offensive. A good shoot is a good thing. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have issues with it, but tactically it was a good thing, or policy-wise it was a good thing.
Right.
But somebody hears good shoot and goes, oh my gosh, that's offensive. They don't know the business. They have no idea what law enforcement does. And that's where you come in and really, you know, I mean, you can hear it in your words and in your action, and see it in your actions. You know what's going on, and that helps you in your role immensely.
Riding along is the best thing I've done.
My agency has been proactive in identifying a good provider. They locally use a team called the counseling team for their psychiatric assistance. Anytime you're involved in a critical incident, you're obviously referred to the counseling team. You go there, and the nice thing is, one, they've been vetted by the agency already and other folks that have been there. So you're not, after a traumatic incident, trying to figure out who to go to and who to see. So our agency's done that. But for those that haven't, you know, looking at your company and the services you offer, what agencies want to look for in terms of someone like, you know, like you said, a lot of people may say, I offer first responders help, but what does that mean? And what should these agencies be looking for when they're looking for help? Obviously,
a specialty in trauma and understanding of the culture, police, fire, EMS culture, understanding what it's like to have burnout, understanding that this is a very tough population. The ability to go in and educate up front, because the education piece really opens the door for people realizing that they need help. And when they do, they're more likely to come get help if they've seen you in person and approached you afterwards. So the ability to teach and train, to speak the language, therapists have to have written out that I was just talking to a bunch of folks about how my pet peeve is when therapists say that they work with this population. They've never been in a patrol car. They've never been in the back of an ambulance. They've never been under a headset up in communications. You can't do that, right? So when I hire therapists, if they don't have prior experience working with public safety, the first 6 months while they're filling their schedule, I pay them to go ride out. And it's straight overhead, because we don't bill the agency that they're riding with for them to ride along. It's just straight overhead, because that investment has to happen before they can really do that kind of work, right? So it's just imperative that people are culturally competent in terms of this world, that they speak the language, and that they've got experience out in the field.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Eventually, you went in and created your Tania Glenn and Associates, and for people that are listening, it's taniaglenn.com. You can go look at Tania's website, and you can learn a lot just from Tania's website. But it doesn't just show what they do and how they do it. It really is impactful. There's a lot of things on that website that are impactful. And I want to talk to you about a couple of those things. On the opening page, there's 3 words that come up, and I want you to talk about these 3 words and how, from your perspective, what they mean to you with your group of very hardworking people? Triage, generate, activate. It's the first three words that are on the screen. Talk about triage, generate, activate.
The key for whether it's an individual person coming in for therapy or a bad thing happening in a critical incident with an agency or multi agencies is the importance of triaging who needs what when. We don't just slap one intervention on everybody. So we triage every situation. We triage all of our patients. We generate the best plan possible, and then we activate. And that of course is TGA, which is Tania Glenn and Associates. So that just, I mean, when I thought of that, I'm like, that's who we are. We triage every patient individually, every situation. No two situations are the same. We never slap one idea or one Band-Aid on this gaping wound, and then we activate. And so that to me is just how we roll.
It's really cool, and it means I'm so glad that we talked about that, because it's like your philosophy of the group of people that you have brought together to help first responders, all in three words. It really covers it. One other thing that comes up as you scroll down, some other words I want you to talk about. This seems obvious. When I say that, what I'm about to say seems really obvious, but I want to hear Tania Glenn's perspective on going beyond what should be obvious. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional.
To me, that just sums it up, right? Everybody in life, you're going to have pain. Nobody has that perfectly like unscathed, completely blessed life where you're never going to suffer. We're all going to have pain, but it's what we do with it, right? How long do you live with that pain? How much do you suffer? How long do you put it off, right? Or do you come in, you get help, and you get to the end of trauma treatment, which is called post-traumatic growth, which is when you say things like, wow, I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but it has made me better, stronger, and wiser. And then you move on, right? And then you help others. And so to me, like, it's coming. It's not if, but it's when in everybody's life. But what do we do with it? Do we get caught in a moment? Or do we get help? Do we heal? Do we grow? Do we become better human beings for having gone through this and reach that pinnacle post-traumatic growth? That's why that's up there.
Yeah. Wow. It's important for that to be up there. One other thing that pops up is it's a video that kind of pops up on your website, and it's a variety of first responders and therapists, I believe, that just say one word, and they go down this list, and it focuses on the person, and they say a word. And I want to ask you about a couple of those words. I'll give the audience you should watch it first of all, because it's a very impactful video. But I won't give it justice. But I'll tell you that some of the words are trauma, pain, addiction, anxiety, depression. But one of the words, and it's two words, is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. Tell us about compassion fatigue.
Thanks to our sponsor, Dallas Avionics, who provides innovative products to law enforcement, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, military, air medical, search and rescue, and special missions operations. Dallas Avionics distributes OEM equipment, including communications equipment, digital audio systems, PA systems, flight tracking, and other mission-critical devices. Visit DallasAvionics.com for more details.
You know, when I teach at academies and I have recruits or cadets or rookies, I ask them to take a mental snapshot of what it feels like to be on the precipice of this amazing career where you get to go help people. Like, you get paid to help people, and you are drawn to this because of your resilience, your genetics, it's ingrained in you. Whereas, people strive for money. First responders strive to go right the wrongs and help people and find justice and stamp out death and suffering, right? And I asked them to take that mental snapshot of what it feels like. Because for most people, it's right around the 7-year mark when you're burned out and you're questioning, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? you need to go back to that mental snapshot, like make it a muscle memory. And I ask people to never, ever, ever forget why they do what they do. And one of the things that happens to our first responders is that every day we stick them into the worst days of people's lives. Nothing is going well when someone calls 911. Like it's, shit's hitting the fan. And so we see pain and death and suffering and trauma and chaos and grief and sorrow and sadness and despair and all these things, right? And we see the worst things that people do to each other. And we see the worst things that people do to their children. And what happens is, and I remind first responders this all the time, is that anytime you're running code 3 into whatever mess you need to go clean up, you're passing hundreds, if not thousands of happy, healthy people or flying over them. And they don't call you to their house because they don't use heroin and beat the crap out of each other every night. What happens, though, is because we stick every first responder into the bad, you forget about all the good. And when you forget about the good, you attribute all this bad stuff to society in general. And then, of course, simultaneously to all of that, as you're getting in your career, who do we start to hang out with? Like-minded. We start to hang out with other police officers and firefighters. And when you reach that sort of that burnout phase, everybody's an asshole and an idiot. And it's like, except for the really happy, healthy people who you never interact with because they pay their taxes in case you need them, but you don't go to their house every night. And so the compassion fatigue is when you just are done. Like you hate everybody, you hate society, everything just pisses you off. Like, and really, truly, like there are people who are so happy you're there, you never interact with them. They're grateful. And especially since, it started with Ferguson and then 2020 was like gas on the fire, especially law enforcement. I think people are afraid now to approach police officers because the media has done so much damage to the profession that they don't understand, right? And I like to joke with my audience too, not to mention the fact that you have this awesome resting bitch face. And so nobody wants to approach you anyway because they're afraid of you. But what happens is this divide, right? And when you have this divide and you attribute the bad qualities of society, then you lose compassion for people, right? Until you walk into somebody's house and you connect with somebody. And then because you don't want that connection, because that means emotions, you shut it down. Like, I don't feel anything. And so that compassion fatigue, to me, I always say this, like if something happens at my house, like I don't want RoboCop coming in. I want the one who's going to put his arm around me and tell me it's going to be okay. Like that's what I want. I don't want just the facts, ma'am. I want the one to say, Tania, why don't you sit down? Let me get you some water. Like you're going to be okay, right? And that kind of thing versus like, talk to the hand. And so I think that, and one of the things we work on in our therapy is remembering to see all the good people who really love you because you work for them too.
Jon, this sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This theme, we talk about this theme regularly about how, as patrol officers particularly, we forget what you just talked about because of going to it over and over and getting tainted and having compassion fatigue. And we don't realize how impactful we are sometimes. We go back to this example regularly with episode 100 with Jimmy Hatch, Touching the Dragon author, where he says, he had a gun in his mouth and his wife took it away from him and called 911, and he wanted those officers to kill him. He, in his words, I paraphrase, he says, and I get the two nicest, most professional cops that Norfolk, Virginia has to offer. And within 5 minutes, we're talking about baseball. That's Jimmy talking about that. Mm-hmm. What if he had gotten the guys on the shift that have compassion fatigue, like you just described, which is a lot of cops? His outcome may not have been the same. And that impacted Jon and I, and it has been a recurring theme with other guests about sometimes we forget how important our words and our actions are as we go to these routine, I hate the word, calls, because it's the most important call to that person. You described it beautifully, Tania. Jon, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, everything you described, I can see in my own career. I remember sitting in the academy and someone coming in and talking to us about what you just described. And I remember kind of feeling like I was rolling my eyes, like, whatever, this isn't going to happen. And it did. And I don't think I realize it until I'm in the thick of it and I hate everybody and I'm sick of dealing with domestic violence calls. And, essentially you feel like you hate the world and all the negativity that's in the world. But like you said, you step back and you realize later on, it's not like that. You're just surrounded by it all the time. So I go to air support and now I'm in a different environment. I'm surrounded by, people who are in a different headspace and, more positivities in this area. And I start to kind of regain who I was before and can kind of see where I had gone, So, we've talked about this problem and I've kind of identified it. But what can you do? What can these folks do that are working patrol? They might be in their 3rd, 4th, 5th year of patrol. What advice do you have for those folks to kind of see that in themselves and deal with it accordingly?
When people hit burnouts, and of course, part of that burnout is going to be that compassion fatigue. What we really do is we work on their resilience. When you jump into this career, you dedicate your life, your energy, everything becomes like focused on this career. And what we do is we have to regain the balance. So your resilience, I like tangible, like doable goals. So your resilience, we start with hydration, nutrition, rest, and exercise. So I will frequently ask people to add 8 ounces of water to their day, 100 steps on that Fitbit, and 30 minutes of sleep at night. And then the next week, it'll be 16 ounces of water a day, 200 steps on the Fitbit, and an extra hour of sleep at night. And what happens is people start to feel better. And then we get into your life outside the job, your family, your faith, your friends, and your hobbies. And that is so important, right? The family, faith, friends, hobbies. And what we do is we try to help police officers and firefighters bring back the balance. Because when you dive into this career and it's what you do, you eat, breathe, sleep it, it's the most important thing. Your cop friends become your best friends. And, so we really try to keep that balance. I ask cadets and rookies, I ask them especially when they're, that young, I ask them to really think about keeping the law-abiding friends that you have now. Some friends you might need to drop, but the law-abiding friends that you have now at this point in your career, keep those friends. Because when you go out with your friends who work 8 to 5 normal jobs, do you know what you do? You don't talk about bad calls and terrible things happening to kids. And you talk about other things in life. And there's so much to talk about in life. So it's that balance, right? And that to me is how we get back to restoring just kind of the souls. I also encourage them, like when you're at the park, you take your kids to the park, notice like the other parents who are really, really protective and have, the Capri Sun ready and their water bottle ready and their pacifier and, all these parents who are so, so protective and love their children so much. That's normal. What you see is not normal. So getting that perspective back is huge. So all of that, it's just about balance. It's about regaining that balance.
I think in a lot of ways right now, it's harder than ever for a lot of these folks to kind of get the balance because of the personnel shortages that exist.
Yeah.
A lot of these folks are being asked to work 6, maybe 7 days a week for a prolonged period of time. So I know that's a challenge that people have to overcome. And then you add, working graveyard hours and the nutrition and lack of exercise that goes with that. It's just a challenging career and environment for folks to focus on that. So I know it's difficult, and I just, again, commend you for all the efforts and time and energy you're putting into helping our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. What I always tell people about that is, small changes pay off big. It's not an overhaul. It's a tune-up. And that tune-up, you feel better, right? And then you keep tuning it up. And the better you feel, the more motivated you are just to like tweak small things and to focus on the things that you can. A lot of police officers these days, what we encourage them and their family members to do is to focus on quality time versus quantity time, because they don't have quantity. They have very infinite amounts of time for family time activities, and to focus on that as quality time versus having quantity. 8 to 5ers, when you have a spouse that's 8 to 5, you got all that time, right? Whereas police officers, especially on swings and nights, it really boils down to making the time that we do have the most impactful and meaningful. And that's the reality,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of family members are learning how to jive with that as well.
I love that you recommend kind of the small consumable change, because I think a lot of times you think of, I've got to be, this rock star weightlifter, and you're the opposite of that right now. How do you get from here to there? Well, no, you don't have to do that. I like your recommendation of just small changes, because that's tangible and that's doable, and you can see the results just by the accomplishing the goal by itself.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that we have to remember is, human beings, we're creatures of habit. We're not light switches. We don't flip on and off. We don't change on a dime. We habituate, and then we gradually change. And so when we gradually allow ourselves to change, what happens is we adapt to that kind of that new normal, right? And it's kind of like when you ran your marathon, right? You didn't start it by doing a 20 miler. You started by running 1, and then it's 2, right? And
Right.
Yeah. So that's how we have to approach this too. It's not an overhaul. It's tune up, and tuning up what you can when you can.
That's a great analogy. And I like the fact that it's doable as well. You can accomplish that little goal pretty easily, really, in the ways you were talking about it. And then you feel good about it. Hey, I did it. And then next week, a little bit more, next week, a little bit more.
Right.
Let's talk about the big one, the big one that everybody knows this term now. And there was a time when nobody knew what this was, even the experts. PTSD. Let's talk about PTSD, and from your perspective about what it is and where we're at with PTSD as far as treating it, identifying it, treating it, and so forth.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com. Thanks to our sponsor, Dallas Avionics, who provides innovative products to law enforcement, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, military, air medical, search and rescue, and special missions operations. Dallas Avionics distributes OEM equipment, including communications equipment, digital audio systems, PA systems, flight tracking, and other mission-critical devices. Visit DallasAvionics.com for more details. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24-megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Thank you for supporting the sponsors who make these conversations possible. Just wanted to close by expressing my belief that taking mental health seriously and looking out for the welfare of folks we work with is critically important. As our good friend RJ Garwood says, make sure to have 5 people in your life that look up for you, but also make sure that you're one of those 5 for other people. Stay safe out there. Cheers.
Time to close up the Hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.